anything too important there. So I think with that, does anybody want to ask anything, share any experiences, or whatever? Let me open it up straight away. Oh dear.
I can ask a question if that's all right.
Please do, yes.
Yeah,
yes.
I'm just curious, has anyone actually done on-premise to online migration this year? Is it still something to do? I mean, I've been involved with one, certainly. I'm just interested to actually hear, is it still happening a lot? A lot of people on-premise still?
Yep.
I think there are people there, yeah, absolutely. But yeah, sorry, Mark, I think you're about to speak.
Yeah, so as you can see from the bags under my eyes, I literally on Monday morning finished a 6-day migration.
Oh, fun.
That was actually using Microsoft's Opal service, I think they're calling it now, on-prem to online.
Mm-hmm.
What we knew as fast track migration.
Right.
So I've just honestly come off the back of that, an 820 gig database. It was quite an interesting one. So yeah, people are still doing it. We're currently speaking to 2 other customers who are looking to do exactly the same. And I think for me, it kind of comes down to when the customers don't know or don't have the staff that know their business anymore. They have a platform that runs their business. They don't have business people that run their business. So you can't go to the business and say, what would you like? Because they don't actually know. It's more, we just want it to keep working, but look shiny. That's kind of what the feedback we have been getting recently anyway.
Yeah. Very good. So you spent 6 days on this. What did the 6 days take up? What were you doing?
So that was really the fast track migration process. So this was a 2013. So if you go through the fast track process, you go 2013 to the latest patch, then you go up to 2015, then you go up to V9 on-prem,
right.
then you go to effectively D365. So a lot of it was the migrations. So you imagine for each one of these migrations, it was an 800 gig database.
It's going to take a while.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think on average, now let me see if I've got my numbers here. Yeah, so on average, each jump took 15 hours.
Wow.
Okay.
Now, there was lots of considerations before that, things like, so the majority of their files were either notes that had attachments or emails with attachments. That was around 600 gig worth of data.
Yep. That's amazing, isn't it?
It's scary.
And do you ask questions about, do you still need all this data?
Yeah. So the company that have just done it are an FSA regulated body.
Okay.
So they did need it.
Yes.
But it was the stupid little things, like every time they sent an email, 3 logos would be attached to the bottom of these emails.
Goodness.
So if you can imagine, there was, 7 years worth of emails that had these 3 images on each one of the emails.
Yikes.
So we had looked at a few things. We had looked at running a Power Automate script to strip out any images on emails. We looked at using 2 different platforms to move the data out of the attachment. So like the file extractor, we also looked at a product by Connected Software. And what that's meant to do is that's meant to extract everything from the database and put it into the SharePoint. The problem was the customer was also doing an on-prem to online SharePoint migration at the same time. So they couldn't stand up their online SharePoint to allow us to throw everything into SharePoint. So there was just so many mitigating factors on that one. It was just a bit of a nightmare on that.
How did you rate the fast track experience, Mark? 1 out of 10.
It's taking too long to answer.
If you get to the right people at the right time, it's fine. There's a lot of cloak and dagger black magic in it. So if you imagine, if you've gone through it before, it uses LCS, which is mainly used for FinOps deployments. And you've got basically 16 tasks. And it goes through a task, it ticks a task. Now, a task that could normally maybe take 5 or 10 minutes could be sitting there for 3 hours. You then have to just kind of tap on the little email fast track team, and they're like, oh no, that's it fixed now, and away it goes. So there's no proactive monitoring of it, and that's what really costs a lot of time.
Right.
So we'd actually quoted 7 days to do the full fast track process, but when you engage them for your go live, then they are sitting there proactively like pressing buttons for you.
Right.
But the test side of it took a lot longer.
Do they still have a minimum number of users to qualify for this service?
So it's changed. There was a minimum number of users, then it went to a minimum license count.
Right.
But now it's totally changed. Now you just have to nominate somebody for it.
Oh.
So because it's all done in LCS, it's now all automated, and there's no cost to Microsoft. So you have to spin up, for each of your jumps, you have to spin up a domain controller, a SQL server, and a CRM server.
Mm-hmm.
So they're all in your Azure tenant, so you're paying for that regardless.
Right.
So LCS is automated process, so you're just going through the processes and click it. So before the original fast track, when it was fast track, it was a case of, it was your hand was held the whole way through, but now it's the on-prem to online migration team, then it's not no hand holding, it's just really escalation if you need to.
Right. Okay.
So I mean, to answer it, yes, it's good. It was better than rebuilding it. I think if you're doing it, you need to try and get yourself a dedicated resource from the on-prem to online team to assist with it.
Right.
Can I ask a question? I was just going to say, could you go through how long? You said it's 6 days to do the integrate, the sort of go live day. How many days planning or weeks, months planning did you do in advance of that?
So this was a 7-month project in total.
Right.
For a couple of reasons. So we had to do an initial diagnostics to see if it was a migration, if they had the knowledge internally to do it or not. We then went through looking at what they had in their system. So there is tools that you can run to check if the scripts and the code and everything are okay. So we had to run through all of those to kind of get the output from that, send that to a developer, get the dev to quote for time for doing that. So in terms of dev time, right, bear with me a moment. Let me just bring up the project plan because I do have it sitting here in the background. So it was 47 days to fix all plugins and code. There's a lot of things in there. I mean, this customer may have been just a different customer, but the problem that they had is they had code written by a supplier that maybe didn't meet development standards. So I think if you were doing this and the code was up to scratch in the first place, I think your rebuild time for the code might be a lot quicker. But there were some interesting caveats in their code, shall we say, that caused a little bit more.
Did they have any SharePoint integration at all?
Yes, there was SharePoint integration, and it was just a case of repointing it once it was live.
So were they going to an on-premise SharePoint already?
They were on-prem SharePoint. They moved to online, so it was really a case of create the site. They had to do the migration into the new site. The new library was set up, and we just pointed at the new library, and everything browsed straight to it. It was actually one of the easier parts of the whole project.
Yeah, because we're still working on the document locations and the sort of legacy. So it would repoint all those. Well, not repoint them, I suppose. Just you start with change your base URL to point to the new SharePoint repository.
Yeah, and that's it. And everything else filters down from there. You don't have to do each individual folder.
Right. Okay, that's interesting.
Honestly, it's the easiest part of it.
Yeah.
I'll give you a laugh off that. It was the easiest part of it, but basically the one task that the customer had for the whole process was click the migrate button for their SharePoint. So we got to do the UAT testing on about 4 o'clock on Sunday afternoon for that one, and they hadn't actually started the migration. They just totally forgot. So you can imagine there was quite a volume of data there that had to be transferred over. It didn't actually finish until Monday night.
Right.
But during the day, the folder structure for A was coming in, then B was coming in, then C was coming in. So it was quite. You could see it was coming in, so it was working. But yeah, it was just a case of point the header URL to the right place. As simple as that.
Just forgive my ignorance on the sort of process, but I was just wondering whether do they lift the data? Do they migrate the data in, or do they take a copy of your database and import your database into a solution? You know, I know there's been.
Yeah. So basically, it's your task. So as the consultancy firm, you have to do it. So you have to go. You have to take the backup of the customer's database, and then put it into blob storage. Once it's in the blob storage, you then create your 3 servers, your SQL server, CRM server, and domain controller. You create them. Once that's done, Microsoft will then connect the database up for you, and you run through the upgrade process. So it's not a rebuild, it's not an import, it's an actual in-place upgrade on a hosted Azure server.
Okay.
So it's an interesting process, and there's a few things before you do your backup. So you have to drop any stored procedures, drop any custom views that you've got, disable audit tracing as well, or audit logs.
Yeah.
So those are certain things, because if you imagine with all these upgrades, it's still writing to the audit table. If there's any database changes, that can crunch a lot of things as it's going through.
Yeah.
And just out of interest, Mark, what areas of Dynamics were they using? Because are we talking about the standard sales and customer service modules, or, you know, once it gets a bit flavoursome, once you've got customizations and whole bunches of custom functionality, right?
So this was all custom.
Okay.
Even to the point they were using a custom lead to account process. We did say at the start of the project, you're doing it wrong. You should go lead opportunity account for these reasons. Not just because that's how the system does it, but because there were actual genuine business reasons for it. They got through to the end of UAT testing about 4 weeks ago, and then decided, actually, we do need that now. So there was a little bit of last minute panic on it.
Sure.
But yeah, it was all custom tables.
Okay. Now, the reason I ask is, especially once you get into kind of decisions like, and so if you've got a real complex deployment and you've got things where you've got stored procedures going on, you've got custom databases, and actually the conversation's more about, are we rebuilding and then doing a data migration into this thing, or are we actually, you know, doing an in-place upgrade?
Yep.
What sort of things did you guys use to make the decision? And I'll be interested in kind of if others have got to that place with certain things, because we're there with a large implementation and with a couple of other smaller customers as well. So I'm intrigued.
So we'll be honest, we ran into some problems. Customer told us they didn't have any stored procedures, they didn't have any custom databases, they never had anything different at all. Turns out all of their reporting was being done on customized views, like customized database views. So they would create their own system view in the database and report on that. So obviously going through Fast Track, those tables disappear. All of their, yes, Joe, that's exactly it. All of their scripts, all of their stored procedures. So when you do the upgrade, if you're going from that late back a version, all the tables have base at the end of them because it's the on-prem. So it's like system user base, all of that changes to your system user. So all of their reporting, all of their stored procedures, all stopped because it was all looking at the wrong tables. So that was a lesson learned for us. And I know next time round, that's going to be the first question that I ask. And I'm going to ask it quite a few times, because when you go through the documentation on Fast Track or on-prem to online, what they actually give you is, here's what you need to do. You need to run this checker on your code. If that runs fine, you can go for it. Yeah, that's green sky or blue sky, green field things. That's not reality. Because they had integrations to their website. They had integrations to another third-party tool as well. And it was all being done by stored procedures that would then call. I mean, they even had an internal custom IIS site that pulled data from CRM and then was an iframe within a form. So
amazing.
So Fast Track, the Fast Track checks didn't pull that in.
Yeah.
And obviously when we said, do you have any custom database scripts or store procedures or anything, they're like, no, we don't have anything. So again, we had done 2 runs of fast track before we actually found that as an issue.
Yeah. No, so that's the thing, because we're thinking about at the moment, we've got a large implementation, kind of almost an ISV product, and with that we're thinking about rebuild, just because when we look at some of the complexity, you think, well, actually going to have to do some of it in Azure, some of it in, you know, in different places, or perhaps, you know, transition things to Power Automate or Logic apps. And then the other thing that you mentioned around existing files, so if people have been using a lot of email and you've got these emails with just attachments on there, right? The question becomes, well, actually, do you just do a level of migration and have a cutoff point where you can call that archive data?
So the way I normally start that conversation is, has your business changed since you implemented this tool in the first place? Or are you still the same business you were 7 years ago?
Yeah.
So the answer to that is normally going to be no, we're a totally different company now. So if you're a totally different company now, where are you going and what do you want to do, rather than what are you currently doing, is a big way of pushing the customer and finding out if they've really got the appetite to do it or if they're happy with the status quo. My preference would be always do a rebuild, but I'm not silly. I know that sometimes customer doesn't have budget, doesn't have maybe the people with the knowledge. They maybe just don't even have people with time. They just need it because it needs to be done, because they're out of support, or because the infrastructure costs are too much, or their enterprise agreement has ended and they then can't go and buy a new license and they have to do it. So there are reasons that you have to go down that route. But yeah, it can be quite scary.
So has anyone done any interesting rebuilds then? Because did you, Mark, have to rebuild any kind of interesting bits of functionality using what's available now in Power Platform and Azure, or has anyone else had to do that sort of thing on an upgrade?
We've done quite a few interesting things. So the IIS site that I was talking about, so they built like an MVC app. So it was pulling in data into a database. It was then crunching a few things, doing some transitions in there, then bringing it back to an iframe, and that iframe was sitting within the window. So we actually had to, rather than pull the data out of the database, we kept it in the database. We wrote a logic app to then look at the data, and then there was about 7 or 8 different bits of code that they had to write to copy exactly what was doing in this MVC app. So that was interesting because the person who wrote the original spec wasn't there anymore. They didn't know what they needed it to do. They didn't know what it is doing. It was just a black box of magic. Nobody knew anything about it. The ISV that originally wrote it are no longer around, so they didn't have the source code. So we had to unpick absolutely everything. So we designed functionality based on what the code was doing rather than what the business needed it to do. The added complexity to that is halfway through the project, their internal CRM admin left. So
nice.
That added some interesting conversations as well. Because the person who took it on from her was really just the next person in line who knew a little bit more about CRM than anyone else. So that's, yeah, it can be very interesting. There was quite a few logic apps got rolled out on that one. And data export service, I don't know if you've touched on that at all for anything yet. So they're used to just querying everything in SQL. So if you try and query CDS, you've got, like through Power Automate or any tools like that, you've got your 2-minute timeout.
Yeah.
Now, when I ran this yesterday, so just to give you an idea of the number of records, let me just find it. Count on all records. So part of what they do as a financial company is collect direct debits. So they have a direct debit collection entity which has 8.9 million records. So they wanted to call that table to find out what direct debits had not been paid that month. Now, your 2-minute timeouts is nowhere near that. So we ended up having to configure data export service, put it into the DB so they could then query the DB from from SQL. Or we're actually using Data Factory, and Joe helped me a little bit on that one over the weekend as I was pulling my hair out.
Kudos, Joe.
Data Factory is amazing.
Yes, there were so many nuances that happened, but it was more after the fact. So if you are running through it, we actually done 3 runs before the live run. So we done a initial let's do a run and see how it looks, and we used that as a dev instance. We then done a second run, and we then installed all of our changes from dev into that run to make sure that it worked okay. We then done a third run where we actually deleted all email attachments and all notes with attachments, because we were going to use a third-party application to move everything out. So that was the reason we done the third run. And that third run actually ran within a day and a half without all of the additional data on there. So I think you definitely need to do a couple of runs just to get your timings right.
If I may, I'm interested in the attachments bit,
Yep.
simply because that's something that I think a lot of customers that I've spoken to, it's kind of being a thought process: do we take everything or not, and storage and those sorts of things, right? What tools did you evaluate, and what got you to the decision in the end that you guys were just going to take everything rather than kind of take that data out and then export it in a filtered fashion online? Yeah,
so we looked at connecting software, which really they have an application that does just that. It pulls it out, puts it into basically a local storage, and then brings it back in. Now, the problems we were having with that was there is a limit of how many API calls you can make. So there's that. There was also a threading issue as well, that you can only have so many threads open. So I think it was like the application would only allow 8 threads to run at once. And when we started doing the calculations, it looked like it was going to take 6 weeks to move everything over.
Yeah.
And that there was nothing we could do. We couldn't increase the size of the VM, because what we had actually tried doing was we extracted all attachments and we put it into a separate DB. So it still had the original GUID, but we put it into that separate DB. And then we tried transferring it through that DB, cranking up the SQL server that we put it onto to see if it would run any faster that way. It just wouldn't. So it was a limitation within the software. So that kind of ruled out connecting software. However, that is the one they've ended up going with, but they know it's going to take 6 weeks to finally get everything over. We looked at Scribe, or TIBCO nowadays. So we went through that process. It was okay for moving the data out, but there was no way of linking it back. So we couldn't stamp the original note with here's where it came from originally.
Okay.
Which the connecting software would do. The connecting software would say it came from here initially, and this is where it's ended up. So Scribe wouldn't do that. It wouldn't let you write back to the original record. We had looked at just creating a standard logic app to do it as well, but it's the appending the original note which was the killer.
Yeah. And if you're just doing a pure migration in, so in a rebuild scenarios, have you guys ever had to do kind of large notes and attachments from on-premise to online?
Yeah. We did use Scribe for that.
Yeah.
That's
our usual preferred choice as well. I was just wondering if anyone done anything different.
Yeah, I know.
It seems to work really well. Sorry, go on.
Kingsway Soft does it as well. And I have been involved in a project where they've used an enterprise service bus from IBM. I forget the name of it now. Basically pulls it into their big data warehouse and then throws it out the other end.
I've used the Kingsway Soft a few times. I'm quite happy with it.
Yeah. It's a nice. I quite like it. The reason that we kind of go down the TIBCO route where I am at the moment is just internal skill sets. We just making sure there's nobody from where I work on the call.
We as an
organisation,
it is going to be recorded, so be careful. Yes.
We as an organisation are very reactive rather than proactive. So it's more a case of, we need a resource, and that resource is needed tomorrow, rather than planning 6 weeks in advance. So we have more people with Scribe skill sets than we do with Kingsway Soft. So it's easier to get a Scribe resource.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that I like about Kingsway Soft is you can actually use it free to do a one-off migration.
If you partner with TIBCO, you can do that as well.
Oh, right. Cool.
You have to be a partner though.
Right. Yeah, I mean, with the Kingsway soft, it's obviously there for ongoing integration scenarios, and then you would need to buy a license. Okay.
The validator that you were talking about, that so it just looks at your instance and see if how likely it is to be how much code will need changing, like your JavaScript that's been deprecated and things like that. Is that available to publicly that you can?
Yeah, that's a Microsoft tool.
All right. Okay.
Okay. When did you say? Sorry, it's Lisa. When did you say it changed from being sort of was it Fast Track being based on sort of license numbers to having to be nominated? When was that?
That was about 4 months ago.
About 4 months ago.
Yep.
Okay.
So if you are a partner, you can go through your partner's technical architect and get all the links for that. But there's a nomination form that you have to complete.
Okay.
If you can't get anywhere with your partner architect, you can speak to Gonzalez Atunes, Atunes. He is now the head of on-prem to online.
All right. Oh, it's just that we're right in the middle of migration because we didn't qualify for Fast Track at the time. And we're doing it with, what are we using? Oh, Kingsway Soft. We're using Kingsway Soft, but obviously we're coming across the usual ones around user views and those kind of things because we've got thousands of them.
Delete them all.
Fair done. You'd have to come back in and help us then.
Well, convince
Put
people
them all
to
back.
delete them.
So yeah, I think we're going to look at. Isn't there something in XRM Toolkit to do it? I think
there is. Yes, there's lots of ways of dealing with that. Yeah.
There are. So if we can't, because I know Kingsway Soft can't cope with it because we haven't, or not all the views are shared.
Right.
With the account that's doing the migration. So we were looking at XRM. I don't know if that's got that same limitation or not.
I don't think so. I managed to look at user views using things in the XRM toolbox.
Fabulous. I might have to come and chat to you a bit later.
Yeah. I might double check that the Kingsway Soft can't get at the table as well. Interesting.
This can't.
Okay. Well, clearly you've tried, so.
Well, I haven't tried.
Okay.
We've got the person who's doing our migration says it can't be done.
Right.
So.
Oh, okay. Oh, I don't like it when people say can't be done.
Nor do I.
Have they actually checked?
Apparently.
Okay, cool. Yeah. This is a big migration then if you're 4 months into it.
Like years.
Oh, Brett, bless you.
Sorry.
Sorry. Brett, I was waiting for you to ask these questions as well.
Sitting quietly.
Yeah.
Well, I've done simple ones in a matter of weeks, but then there have been very simple. So.
Okay. Well, you know our system. It's not horrifically complicated.
No.
Almost there.
Anybody want to raise anything else or ask questions?
Brett, can you think of anything off the top of your head? Ours is more around those views.
What's going on today around user posts? Actually, that's an interesting one.
Yeah.
Around migrating those and not being able to retain the created on for those.
Well, yeah. I mean, there are. I mean, I found in Kingsway Soft there is a way. I mean, because you could, if you map to the field called overridden created on, I think it's called, then the created on shows up correctly.
Email we had earlier told us that field doesn't exist. So okay.
Oh.
Because we didn't want that.
That field can only be written to once. So if you've done it wrong once, you can't go back and override it.
Unless you trash the records and start again.
Okay.
So that field is there. Okay. Otherwise, I was about to say, if we load all user posts with that created on as the day of migration, it makes them nigh on pointless or dangerous, as I was putting.
Well,
we're talking about something. Someone thinks it's a current topic. Okay.
Yeah. So there is a field overridden created on.
There is, yeah, but you've got actually. I'm just looking at some notes I've made. There's a privilege called override created on or created by for records during data import. You've got to make sure that the owners of those records have that privilege. Actually, so I mean, I've been a bit naughty sometimes. I just made all the users a system admin just for the import period, and then sorted out the proper.
We contemplated that, but then I can't lock them out of the system, can I, using the admin mode, because they're all
well,
admins.
there is that, yeah. If you trust them not to go into it while you're migrating, yeah. But otherwise, you'll have to make sure they have all the relevant privileges.
So what I've done is I've popped a link in there to the on-prem to online migration. So looking back at all of my emails, we were approved for it in March. So the restrictions have been lifted since March.
Since March? Okay.
Yeah, there is a nomination form that you have to fill in, but go through your Microsoft Account Manager to get that.
That's roughly when we were rejected, wasn't it?
It's about when we were rejected, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just surprised that nobody mentioned, oh, by the way, it's changed since then.
Does the partner need to have particular competencies or qualifications to allow nomination?
No, because it's based on the customer. So it's customer profile.
Okay.
It's not based on the partner itself.
That's because we don't have a partner, as in general, we only got a partner for the migration.
Do you need one? Yeah.
There you go. Look, the sales pitch now.
Oh, Mr. Sheridan usually come and help, don't you?
Let's just put up Mark's details, shall we?
I can't. It's not open yet.
Oh, bless you. Sheridan, we usually just come and get you. It's fine.
Oh, you are. But you know where I am.
Just a little note as well on your XRM toolbox, moving the views, etc. If you are doing a rebuild, then the schema will be different. So that tool may not work because you're looking at different tables at that point because it's a rebuild.
We imported the solution.
Okay, so if it's the is it the original?
Solution, yeah, we've
We're
done
not
it that
changing schema names or anything like that.
No, absolutely no. We haven't made any schema changes.
Oh right,
we've been in change freeze for the last few months.
But you could come a cropper.
Yeah, no, we thought it would be a bit too much for our user base to cope with a complete change as well as a new interface. So we've gone with a sort of step change. So we'll take it up as is, more or less. Obviously, a few things we've had to change because they don't work now.
Right.
Then,
yes.
And then make changes afterwards because we're only going from the latest version of 8 up, so it's not a huge.
Oh, so functionally you're not massively divergent. Yeah.
So it was mostly business process flow stuff, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Much nicer now.
yeah. All our ones weren't quite working properly.
Yeah. Very good.
So one of the other things just to consider as well, if you are doing the fast track migration, customers will be using a lot of SQL. So one of the things that they would use quite often is the string map base, which is basically your option sets. Now, if you go to on-prem and even using the T-SQL connector, you don't have access to any of your option sets. You'll only bring back the option set value rather than the option set name, which is quite horrible. Unless you start to use a data export service, the data export service will create 2 tables with your local and your global option set. As I found out today. So this is raw and real to me right now.
Guys, I have a question, please. So just around how do you choose the right migration partner? So for us, we're on-prem version 8. I'm trying to sell the dream to the business of the cloud, which obviously is a costly exercise. Our incumbent, so our incumbent support partners, they've given me a proposal, and my eyes watered when I saw it. I've gone to a few other companies just to kind of try and do a comparison, and I've had a quote back from one of them, and it's tiny compared to what I've been quoted by my incumbent, and I'm not really sure if that's because I've not been able to articulate obviously all the intricacies of our system. My superior is a little bit cagey about what I can and can't show people that aren't our support partners. So I appreciate it's difficult with that, but it's vastly different. I mean, my incumbent, they're looking at 100 days, and these other guys, it's like 30 days. So it's really, really different. I mean, our database is 170 gig. I've got like 90 users. Like it's not massively customized. There's a lot of plugins around opportunity products, and we use the Crow project entity. But other than that, there's nothing radical about it. So I just, yeah, I'm a little bit confused about why it's so different.
Have they both given you detailed scopes of what they will do and what they would charge for extra or anything like that?
Well, obviously the one from my incumbent is super detailed because they know the system, so they've broken it down and they've scoped it out, sort of like, you know, entity or sort of department by department.
Right.
So it's difficult to be able to compare like for like, because it's never going to be like for like. But I just found it a bit odd that it's 30 days versus around 100 days.
Yeah, I guess you'd have to ask that partner, you know, how confident are they on that, and how detailed knowledge do they have of the task? You say that your boss is a little reticent to share things, and you know, have they really considered everything? How many, you know, test migrations might they do? Are there any extras that they're going to suddenly hit you for, such as Azure costs or whatever? And ask for references. You know, have they done this for anyone else? Or is this the very first one and they have completely underestimated it?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, they've apparently they've done migrations, and the one that this other people that have given me the quote back, they would be quite suited within our industry. They've got a lot of customers in our industry, so I just I find it a bit odd. I was sort of looking at it going, can't be real, it's too easy.
But then you know, sometimes some partners, the bigger ones, dare I say this, have a little bit of bloat because they've just got more overheads and they take a more formal approach to things, and they're naturally going to have more man-days for things like this than perhaps the smaller, leaner partners that just get on with it. I don't know. Others, what do other people say?
I would say your 30 days is very low. Have they come in and done any sort of analysis on what you have? I know you said you couldn't share the data, but could you share any of the schemas with them or any of the list of plugins?
All I've been able to do really is just kind of do like a team share. So I showed them around the customization solutions, had a quick look at plugins. I provide a count. So nothing that I think is personally in depth enough for them to be able to provide a proper quote. So it's it's quite frustrating for me, but I just I just find it odd that it is such disparity between the two proposals that I've got.
Yeah, I mean, we for the ones that we're doing, we're actually going in and doing 3 days worth of workshops to find out where you are, to what you've got, kind of where you're looking to go. Because if I don't know, I mean, you say you've got 90 users and it's a 200 gig database. What is that database broken down to? Is that files? Is that records?
Yeah, I think a load of it's attachments on emails.
Yeah. So I mean, so for me, if you're doing 3 runs of the fast track, even on a 200 gig database, that's probably 3 days. So there's 9 days of that project already. You've got your kickoff of the project, you've got your wrap up, and you've also got the rebuild of the code. You've got UAT assistance. For that, I'll be really honest, I've not quoted anything under 75 days for that.
Yeah. The first quote, I mean, kind of to answer your question as well in terms of what you'd expect in line with what Mark's just said there, expect that the partner would at least need to do a level of analysis and understand what you're doing, because there are, as we've been talking about technically, there are complexities and there are things that will skew what you need to rebuild and how you need to do that. And part of that's understanding, as Mark said earlier, what your trajectory is, what your path is, what you guys are going to be doing in future. Does it mean actually just a wholesale lift and shift using something like Fast Track or those sorts of things? Or actually, does it mean that they're completely rebuilding your system and then migrating your data in? And both of those can look quite different as well in terms of what the partner's actually offering you. But I'd certainly expect a level of analysis. And even if you're not able to share data, what I'd expect is them to be asking you the questions of, you know, what sort of business processes are you running on your dynamic system? What areas of the business? How many groups of users perhaps? And what types of things? And then, as Mark said, even deeper than that, looking at what those customizations look like in terms of plugins and workflows, automations, and those sorts of things. So yeah, you definitely want to have an in-depth response from someone and looking at that to see.
And the other part as well is license profiling on it. Have they come in and looked at what licenses you've got? Because at the moment, if you're on-prem, you're going from your database can be any size you want to moving into the cloud where you are limited to what database size you have.
Yeah.
So there's profiling of licenses, of users. There's quite a few things because so if you imagine you do 3 fast track runs off 200 gig, that's 600 gigs sitting in that database there, or sitting in your Dataverse environment that you have to consider as well. And if you've got 90 users, you probably don't want to buy those 90 licenses right up front before the project starts. You want to be tapering them in towards the end because you don't want the 2 or 3 months worth of costs on those licenses, unless you get an agreement with Microsoft where you buy the online licenses and you get the free on-prem licenses. But again, that's depends on who you buy your licenses from.
Yeah, with that, we've bought our on-prem licenses anyway, so unless we were to be expanding the business and need new users, that's of no use, is it? Because they won't get any kickback for the licenses you've already purchased.
You'd be surprised if you.
I've asked that question and the answer was no. So perhaps I didn't ask the right people.
Have you asked that question forcefully enough?
Yeah, we got a flat no as well.
So my scenario for that is we're looking at migrating or moving to Salesforce.
Yeah.
That's always my opening gambit because that always gets people. It's known the right terminology. So you see, if you go to Microsoft and say, "Look, I'm thinking about doing this. I want to buy the license, but I'm also looking at SharePoint, Salesforce." That then becomes what's called a Salesforce compete opportunity, and there's a lot more can be done around that. Is it Microsoft you buy your licenses from?
No, we get them through our support partners, and I think they get them through West Coast.
West Coast Cloud, right? Okay. So So with that, it's a bit more difficult. Do you have a Microsoft account manager that you can directly go to?
We probably do, because we've got a tech side of the business as well. So we have our own. We are thinking of maybe if it's possible to ultimately do the Microsoft licenses through our tech business, which sits under our umbrella group. It's a bit complicated, but then it means that we can make the benefit of not having any, markup on the licenses. That reduces cost for us that way. But I think ultimately
you still need to go through a CSP, so you would still have to go through a West Coast or a Ingram Microcloud or somebody like that. You still need to go through that. But when you go directly to a CSP or an indirect CSP, you have the option that you can actually negotiate with them and with Microsoft, and that's when it gets fun.
Yeah, you probably should go down, not up, really, because the volume that they're buying. So realistically, the prices should always go down, but that doesn't always happen.
Well, especially if you're going from an older version. So if you imagine when you bought just a CRM on-prem license when that was actually really a thing, you're now going to different SKUs where you're only buying parts of the product where the price has increased quite significantly over time. Microsoft have been quite good at how they've done it. It's been small incremental rises over the past 5 years. It's not been like a big bang. So you may find if you're having to license additional users with additional storage space, with additional API calls or portal logins, it can mount up and it can scare the living bejesus out of people.
Storage-wise, we'll be looking to move attachments out into SharePoint and utilise that, and then back things out to the blob, all of that good stuff, because I don't want everything sat in CRM. It's too expensive.
Blob storage is your friend.
Yeah.
But just the storage costs in online are less than they were originally, so you won't have to pay the full $40 per gig that you would for the SQL stuff. There's a much cheaper charge for files now.
Okay.
Yeah, we looked at it. Yeah, we looked at it, but then we looked at the different tools to actually do the to strip things off and pop them in.
You don't need to do anything. No. This is all automatically handled by the platform. So anything that's an attachment to a note or an email, is automatically, with you doing absolutely nothing and it looking no different in the interface, is classed as fast storage, and behind the scenes it's moved into
okay,
Azure
that's
Bucket.
that. Yeah, because it's the cheaper storage now. Yeah,
and that's
we
like
looked
$2.
We looked at what we already had, and I think we ended up at about 4-year break even with the cost of using a tool to move what we've already got. So I think we ended up, I think it was going to be about 4 years to get the break even on that.
Yes.
Can't you just ask Power Automate to move files from emails into SharePoint though, once you're in the cloud? Yeah.
Once you're in, it's what we've already got. Yeah, that was the problem.
Yeah, I think it's easier to put a solution in going forward, because you can just Power Automate it, Logic App it, connect software. It's quite simple. It's getting the original ones in there and getting the reference link.
Would you need to be cautious around the volume of files, depending how active your CRM is for attachments, if you're using Power Automate with a
Okay.
I mean, you would need to be hitting loads of calls, but it's still something that's to consider, isn't it?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
No, you're welcome. Well, we have a few minutes before we wrap up. Anybody want to talk about any other aspects?
I was just wondering, does anyone run into like API sort of limits going from like on-prem, large scale on-prem users onto an online system, and obviously like this per app? So, or do you get all that sorted out when you're sort of talking to Microsoft about moving to sort of make sure you've got your you're saying we've got X amount of users and we use 3 or 4 apps that we built in the old dynamic system. Do they sort of give you any guidance or help that way, or is it something you've got to figure out yourself and then work
That's
out?
something you would so Microsoft always put that back on the partner, and if there's not a partner, they'd expect the end company to be able to do that.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
And if I may, just regarding the API limitations, we've had a migration whereby we were continuously hitting the API limitations, and for a temporary period, Microsoft can actually raise or remove that limit from your instance if you give them a call. We had that, and they've given us a sort of a 14-day free reign, if you will.
Yeah. Which is perfect for your migration process, but if you're doing
obviously got to optimize what you do, but just for the purposes of importing so many records, it's a one-time fix, if you will.
Yeah. You could also look at Data Factory as well, because there's no Data Factory charges a flat fee for transferring data, which is like £70 per month. So it's not done on records. It doesn't hit any API limits as well. So that's a way of looking to do mass imports as well.
Yeah, funny enough, I did find out about Data Factory and used it, but it was like 2 months after the fact. It would be nice at the time.
Okay, well, perhaps that's a good point to stop. So thank you, Mark, for your valuable contributions. Thank you, everyone else, for and asking the questions, and hopefully you found it useful. So now I think the next thing we have in the main auditorium meeting is the Ask Me Anything session. So let's go and see what weird and wonderful things people are going to come up with.
Cheers,
Cheers.
guys.
Thank you very much.
Take care, all.
Thanks.
Bye.
Lisa, I'll be in touch if I get an answer.
Wonderful. Thank you, Virgin.
All right.
Thanks. Bye.